Even if you say the most brilliant conscious building statements to your children, if you're not modeling that, if you're modeling reactivity, if you're modeling worrying about the external world, or whatever it is that you're modeling is more of what's going to impact your children.
Welcome to the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacy Phillips. As a leading manifestation advisor with a process that's, radically different from the old New Age model, mine is rooted in psychology, neuroscience, and my energetic gifts. I created this podcast to help you expand your subconscious limiting beliefs about the potential of deserving the manifestations you're calling in. Therefore, you're tuning into this podcast series to show your subconscious that anything you desire is possible. And by pressing play, you've already started the process of manifesting it. If you enjoy this episode, please leave us our review, comment, and share it with your fellow manifestor that's struggling or could really benefit from the information that you're about to learn. So I've officially just wrapped up 7 days of Pachakarma at Surya Spa with Marta. And 5 days before that, 3 of them, I did the banana treatment, if anybody's ever heard of that, at the suggestion of a few friends, including my meditation teacher, Jack. You guys have heard her podcast episode before. Everybody suggests that this is like a real necessity. And so I got in touch with Marta. We've also had her on the podcast before as well, of Surya Spa, and just wanted to see if they did that. And of course, during the consultation, we decided to do the Pachakarma together. And I paid full price for this. I didn't get a discount. So this isn't a plug. What an incredible experience. If any of you have experienced Pachakarma, bravo. I don't know why it's taken me so long to do this, but I have to say, it was really tremendous for my manifestation practice because it super opened up my third eye. I mean, incredible experiences were happening. During it, I had spirits visit me just in my third eye. I think that last episode you guys heard with Shaman Durek made way for that a little bit. And I think that Panchakarma is just so psychically opening. And yeah, so I had that happen. I had a lot of new channeling come through that I'll be sharing on the speaking tour. I've been taking down notes in a crazy fashion. And then I got to witness a ton of patterns. I think it was that whole Lionsgate portal. I was asking to upgrade in a lot of ways simultaneously with doing this work through up level, next level that we're all doing in the roadmap right now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll have a link below. Yeah. Oh my God. Because I'm up leveling so much, so many things are becoming apparent to me and presenting themselves in way of patterns. But the crazy thing is it's taking very little effort to shift and step into them. So I'll be doing the DIs or a very simple journal exercise, which will result in clarity, instant clarity, but also instant unpeeling. So things are happening at a really rapid rate for me. Yeah. So I just wanted to share that. And yeah, I mean, I'm so intrigued. I've only really gotten my feet wet with Ayurveda before with self-care practices. And I learned a bit about it in herbalism, but it has such deep explanations for things that I experience within symptoms of illness that no other science or system can explain. So it's taken the edge off of my fear of trying to eat with the principles a little bit more during the different parts of the days, restructuring my part of the days, like the Vata time, taking it much easier, running errands and doing the things I need to, scheduling them during Pitta. And then, of course, during the other Vata, doing more yin yoga and channeling. So I'm pretty inspired and hyped by it all. And I happened to see this really crazy sorceress woman that was suggested to me during it that I may share. I'm waiting to see the effects, but it was pretty wildly out there. And if it does prove to be really helpful and beneficial because there are little lifestyle changes I need to make, I'm definitely going to share her. So I have to give a huge thank you shout out to the beautiful women of Serdia who do feel like my family now. And I'm very excited to continue this journey. And I just wanted to share that because that fear of trying new habits when you've had insulin issues and a lot of the things that I've struggled with, it's scary. And that must be what it's like doing this work and knowing that you need to take action steps that you can see very clearly, but you're really afraid to do that, to step into them. So I just really wanted to loop that back because I really see that. And we're doing this all side by side. And it's been tremendous for all this next level work with an up level. And I'm really excited about that. Otherwise, I'm trying to think if I have any really great shares with everybody in way of, I think, I'm going to do a Friday roundup coming up very soon. But one product that's really taken my attention. Oh, and I have to apologize to you guys as well, because I kept talking about you and I was totally mispronouncing the name, which we've had a little bit of linking issues. I apologize in the past couple of episodes. So from this episode on, you will always find the right links below. But I kept talking about the phytoretinol and I was saying bioessence. It's called Biossance. I believe I'm saying it right now. So anyways, I'm actually pretty impressed. I've been trying other things of their line, like their vitamin C serum. Incredible. Their daily moisturizer. And I'm really loving their eye cream. Again, not sponsored or anything. I'm just testing it all out and really digging it and needing to give that apology. So that episode you heard of Lila and I 2 episodes back, you can actually cruise through the show notes and we have the proper links now. So I apologize for anybody that was looking for those resources and couldn't find them. And otherwise, there's just a couple of great little announcements. One hot tip I have to tell people that I think nobody's noticed, but at the house, the Forced Retreat House, it still isn't booked for autumn equinox, September 21st, and it's not booked for New Year's Eve. So if anybody's looking to really celebrate those times, it's a great time to go check that out. It'll be linked below if it hasn't been booked by the time this airs. Yeah, and a hot tip for everybody else who's even considering going to Yosemite, the best times to go are, in my opinion, September and October because everybody's back in school. But it's still warm enough to swim in all of the watering holes and see the waterfalls. And because the snow melt was so grand last winter, it's very elongated this season. So if there's something inside of you that's wanting to pick up, your best couple friends, or you're wanting to do a little quick mini work retreat with each other or friendship, whatever, it's a great time to go up there. And also worth noting, I don't know if people are really able to notice the pricing differences on VRBO. It doesn't really show that well. But in the winter, Monday through Thursday, the price is $500 a night. And then Friday through Sunday, it's $650 a night. So of course, if you're going up as couples, you would obviously divide that by 6. Or if you're just going up as a foursome group, that would be by 4, which makes it, I think, far more affordable than people are seeing that sticker price. And also spring, autumn, and summer, Monday through Thursday, it's $600 a night. So hot little tip there for anybody who is interested in celebrating those dates. And last but not least, the tickets we are flabbergasted and so grateful for how quickly those are selling out for the speaking tour. In November, LA and San Francisco. December will be Chicago and New York. And then in January will be London and Paris. And I think that last count we had there, they vary, but they're about 30% gone on an average. I think it's like 30 now. So just giving you that heads up if you're thinking of going. And of course, members do get a discount who are within the pathway. You get $15 off. And if you didn't receive that newsletter, go ahead and email us in on the homepage on that little tiny black square to ask for that code. It is only for members, so you can't buy multiple tickets because it's cross-referenced and checked. But if you are a member, I'm so excited to see you there. Now that brings us to today's episode. I think it's been long awaited by many people. I'm very excited for it. I have to apologize in advance. I had a very spacey Panchakarma brain in it, but Dr. Nicole was really, really gracious and so informative and just such a beautiful spirit. It's so beautiful to see what she is doing in the clinical world, that is, I think we can all agree, is in a very holistic approach to healing. And she's really, really leading the way in that. And we have very similar approaches and thought processes to healing. And we speak very similar languages most of the time. So I think you'll find Dr. Nicole LePera to be incredibly expansive in every way, shape, and form. You know her as the holistic psychologist on Instagram, where she shares so much information on healing. In this episode, we discuss how she intertwines her background in clinical psychology with a holistic approach to the mind, body, and soul. And I think we talk deeply about healing the inner child, which I really wanted to dig out some tools to be helpful to take your practice deeper. And I think she gives us some new ways to approach and think of it, that awareness factor in our conscious everyday lives, which I really enjoyed. And just how we can become more flexible and open, for the natural shifts in ourselves and our circumstances that we may experience. She also shares her tools for approaching self-healing and acknowledging patterns in our own self-narratives that may be contributing to the shadows we often build. I think we all build constantly. So this episode, you're going to love it if you're in a quest for healing, regardless of where you are in your journey, or if you happen to be in school right now down the same career approach, or if you're just trying to heal from simple anxiety or very, extreme cases and bouts. Severe is the word I'm looking for. I think you'll find her to be a really, really beautiful expander. Let's get into it. We're so excited to have you here today. The question I kick off with everybody, whoever comes on, is what's your cultural background and upbringing? Which I think is very important for your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so first and foremost, Lacy, I'm beyond honored. As I said to you when we were first chatting here today, you've just been such an incredible inspiration, and your community is amazing, and I'm so excited to have a chat. So,
thank you.
From a personal perspective, I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I would say kind of culturally under a really kind of Italian, American city type of experience. I am much younger in age than my two siblings, who is 15 and 18 years older than me. So I had a very unique, I think, micro family experience of having siblings, but not really having them of age in terms of all aspects of my upbringing.
And in most of our courses, we deal obviously with a lot of inner child work. And a big question I have for somebody who's actually trained in this work is, how do you go about in your process that's holistic approaching inner child work? And then I'll have a follow-up question after that.
Absolutely. So it's interesting. This might be surprising for you and maybe your listeners to hear, but so I was trained as a classical clinical psychologist. And nowhere in my training is inner child, the concept even spoken about, which is really surprising, I believe. So we are not taught about, childhood experience. It's interesting. I was talking with my partner about this recently. I'm sure is talked about, but so insignificantly that I'm even having a hard time calling to mind this being discussed in that more academic setting. So for me, my emergence and introduction really into the whole aspect of the concept of inner child, and at least the way I see it, that this part exists in each and every one of us as adults, was something that I discovered through both my own healing journey and the research then and self-study and self-learning that I did outside of my clinical program. So after the fact, essentially. So for me, it came in a wave too, because I make a joke when I say this, but there's a lot of truth in it. If you would have spoken to me a decade ago, my narrative about my past and, if you will, my childhood experience would have been drastically different than what I have come to know, a little bit closer alignment with my truth of what that was. So for me, it was really allowing it into my consciousness that there was, or questioning, I think, my past experiences, and then therefore the impact that they have. So the work and how I now incorporate this into my work is, first and foremost, you always hear me talking about developing consciousness, or the tool of self-observation, aimed at being able to, over time, really identify the impact or that place where that inner child lives in each of us. But I say that first part, and I speak that so emphatically about the consciousness and the self-observation, because the more I've shared my own experience, was surprising to me to hear how many other humans out there have that same one version of their past that evolves over time as they allow new aspects into their consciousness to maybe view it a little bit more objectively, or have maybe more information about other people's experiences, because I think that also impacts what we view as our experiences in comparison. So first and foremost, acknowledging what the effect we may be carrying still of our inner child is, and then using that tool of consciousness to be able to explore the ways that we're still impacted. A lot of times I talk about inner child, stuff comes up really in the context of our relationships, whether it's our friendships, our professional relationships, our partnerships, and really trying to explore the role that those deeper wounds play, with the ultimate goal is to access choice and empowerment about how now as an adult, we not only navigate those situations where we feel ourselves triggered, for lack of a better word, where we're feeling that inner child wound coming to the surface that might dictate our reaction if we don't make a new choice. But then also, I think, as an adult, learning how to heal those deeper wounds for ourselves. And for some of that means self-soothing through our emotions. For some of us, that means meeting unmet emotional needs that we did not get met in our caregiving environment. So that's the way I frame it, conceptualize it, and I think work to address it.
Is there sort of just a nutshell practice or example you could give of kind of hitting that place of consciousness and witnessing, and then having some sort of a tool around it?
Absolutely. So an example I always give is from my own experience. A lot of my deeper wounds are around this concept of consideration, or of not being seen and acknowledged as, the unique individual that I am, and that
as we all are,
feel we all are. And I do not, and again, when I speak about our past environments and the way that we came by these wounds, if you will, I often say this because I believe this to be true. It's of no fault of the caregivers around us, because the way I see it is people can only provide others, even children, what they provide themselves, right? So I say that to say that in my environment growing up, there was a lot of emotional absence. I had really withdrawn, my mother in particular, and I luckily was able to become reinforced and feel good enough in ways that were very much academic based and sport based. So I was able to feed a deeper need of feeling seen and heard in some ways. But when we talk about really just being seen and heard and considered as a unique being, that was largely absent. So I carry that wound, and how it would show up when I started to practice consistent self-observation, which is exploring my mental world and the effect, this is the way I say it, the effect that my thoughts have coloring my experiences.
Awesome.
What I started to realize was that when I would find myself, in particular in my relationships, really emotionally reactive in a way that, I think after the fact, I was a little like, oh, geez, what was that all about? My partner too, like, what the hell? It was a dish on the table, but it would come up in small ways, in dishes on the table, in lack of my half of food being in the fridge as I left it, in she's out having a good time and maybe I'm not getting the frequency of communication. So emotionally, what would happen is I would notice a big reaction in myself. I'd feel really hurt, really upset in some way. And what I started to do in exploring my internal world was that I was making all of those instances to mean, or my subconscious was assigning a meaning of, I'm not being considered. She's not considering me because she's not more in touch with me. She's not considering me by not putting the dish where I would prefer it. So I think when you view it in those terms, I could understand then why my reaction was so big, why I was screaming and yelling or, withdrawing to the room. I was that upset because when you feel not considered, especially by someone that you love and live with and want to be considered by, it's hurtful.
And especially when that wound is just triggered, it's so much more painful than
it was so much bigger. That's why I make a joke, because my partner, meanwhile, is like, whoa, it's a cupcake, Nicole, or you know what I mean? Like, I'll go get you another one, or, I just did all this other stuff in the house, and not to make it about division of labor, but the dish is on the table, like I'll put it away, and so I think a lot of times when our wounds are touched, people around us are confused. We might even be. I then leave and I feel terrible. I screamed, I yelled, I threw a dish, or I stormed off and now I don't want to speak to her. It's like, what that, and I feel shameful about it because I don't understand, or I didn't until I looked why it was such a big deal. So the two ways that I worked with this myself and that I suggest this thing can be worked with, these wounds, is first and foremost really being aware of those narratives and when I'm assigning those. And I think there's nothing more powerful than where we put our attention. So I cannot stop the fact that my subconscious still did try to assign that meaning in similar scenarios moving forward. Even though I became aware of it, my subconscious was not like, oh, okay, we're done with that.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Cool. I'm going to do it by all means. No, it's that it kept saying, oh, here's not another instance, but it was my job in that moment to continually redirect my attention away from that. And the way that I suggest my clients build this muscle is through some sort of mindfulness-based meditation practice where we can actually cue up our brain in a new way to help us do this, because it's hard. And I think we all know that when we try to change in these reactive moments, and this is also, I think, why it's really frustrating, it's hard as hell. Our subconscious is so powerful, and the deeper the wound, the harder it is to break out of those reactions. So that's why I'm a big proponent of practicing meditation, because it actually does change the brain structurally and allow you then to show up for yourself in this new way. So that's I think the subconscious, I call it the more surface level, even though it's not really surface. And then my deeper emotional work became exploring the ways that I would consider myself as now an adult, that I could soothe or make myself a priority and make sure that I was not only in those moments, but more globally overall, because I was not taught how to consider myself. I did not have parents modeling that. I was not giving an environment where I had the holding space, if you will, to teach myself or to learn. So I say teach because for a lot of us, it's new.
Totally.
I don't know my emotions. I am an adult. I am even a psychologist who has a PhD, if you will, in emotions. And I had no idea where to begin this. So my deepest work then was, okay, Nicole, how can you consider yourself just in a human on a daily basis in small ways? So in those moments, I didn't feel like I was reliant on my partner or anyone outside of me to consider me. I was already filling my well, and anything additional, I think this makes us more flexible in our partnerships too. Anything additional than that the people around me bring to the table, the relationship table, becomes something that I can accept with much more flexibility. It doesn't have to fit the exact way I need it to fit to register anymore, because I'm considering myself. So.
You just said that so well. A question I want to ask you, because you're actually, somebody who understands this and works one-on-one with people. In addition to what we were just saying, what is a good indicator when you feel a wound has truly been healed or shifted, through neuroplasticity, through reinforcement? Is it that we're not triggered anymore or?
Yeah, I love that you asked this question. I actually have considered this in some deep exploration of my own and observation of people, because a question I got in a slightly different way before was, does the wound go away? And I consider that as the first stop of this, answering this question. And quite honestly, Lacy, I'm not sure. And so the working model that I have right now is a good indication is how we're able to navigate those trigger moments. So it doesn't mean that I might not have an ouch, as I call it, on some level, but can I consistently show up in my conscious mind, making the decisions that I would want that are more in alignment with my conscious or my authentic self? Because I believe that to some degree, some of our wounds, this is going to be a very vague answer, but in some degree, some of our wounds, I think we can fully move past, but I don't know if those really chorused. And I believe we all have at least one really pivotal deep wound. And I'm not quite sure if we get to the place where we just become, maybe we limit ourselves, maybe the triggering moments shrink down, but might there always be one or two things that still produces some version of an ouch? Maybe. I'm totally open to amending this statement and getting to a place in my own healing and maybe just kind of working with other humans where I can make a different statement. Say, yes, true full healing occurs. And I'm completely open to modifying any and all of my statements. But right now, I think that a good indicator is how do we navigate those moments in life? Because I think that's what keeps us stuck in those, or I know that's what keeps us stuck in those old patterns and those old ways of reacting. And sometimes even stuck in our patterned ways of being in a relationship.
I agree entirely. And this is something I philosophize all of the time because like you said, those like core deep wounds, I think for me, for instance, one big one is, needing to seek out the love that I didn't get or the recognition, and still doing that in career. And no matter how much I'm reprogramming that, it starts, through, I think just the neuroplasticity, it starts to diminish. It does, but I still see it in things I do, And then I'm also like, it says my Leo rising, so I'm so hippie that way. But that's a good pivot. What is your sun sign? What's your astrology sign?
Virgo.
Oh, I love Virgo.
Birthday coming up in September.
When is it? September?
The 15th.
Oh, wow. I dated a 16th before.
Yeah, okay.
And now my fiance's the 9th, the double Virgo too. What about your partner? What is she?
Cancer. She was just in July. Yeah.
Perfect. Oh, wow. And do you know your human design? Are you familiar with that?
I actually think I took that, but I'm forgetting what it is that is it a generator?
Yeah.
Is that one of them? I believe that might have been what I
Okay, great. Everyone who listens here is like, got it.
Yeah,
cool.
I was like, I know you guys know this language. I should have reminded myself. It was a bit ago that I took it, but I'm quite sure that's what it was.
Excellent. So a big question we got was, can you explain the ego work you do and how you can allow us to better integrate our authenticity?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I talk about ego, I think when we hear ego, put it this way, societally at large, I think a lot of us assign a more negative connotation, right? We think it's that very kind of arrogant, better than, holier than thou presentation of ourself in the world. I actually neutralize my definition of ego, and I see it as having just a standalone protective function. And I believe we all have ego in us that developed usually, as always, as all things, at a much earlier time where we are given. So when we are deposited on this planet, however the hell everyone out there thinks we get here, we arrive, right?
Some way,
somehow. And there's humans around us and there's systems around us. And essentially, to put it really simply, we're given messages. Some of us very direct messages, again, a very simple way on what's good or bad, aspects of a personality or good or bad, acceptable, unacceptable, whatever language in a very superficial way. Ways of showing up in the world. We're given direct messages and indirect messages from our starting in our caregiving environments, expanding to, we are shipped off to school quite young. School definitely has a lot of appropriate and inappropriate designations of our behavior, of our way of being. And you'll always hear me describe us fresh humans on this planet as two things, intuitive and adaptive. So we have an internal guidance system. I believe we will have that and retain that throughout our course of journeying this planet. It's just a question of how connected and how trusting are we of that. And the adaptive piece, I think, applies to the ego work. So what we do as children, we learn how to show up in the world to get reinforced in a positive way, whether that means to maintain love, acceptance, any good feeling, essentially. We learn the side of us, if you will, to show, and the side of us to keep a bit hidden. A lot of times the side of us, our shadow side, if you will, is our shameful, we start to feel, depending on the messages. And some of us have gotten really direct, not helpful messages to this extent, around which to then feel shameful of. So then what I view as the ego is protective, the way that we continue to show up in the world to retain that love, that acceptance, that goodness but it does not mean that we're not the whole self. The whole self is us. So I think one of two things is important, as always, observing our action of the ego in the world. Anytime we speak emphatically, anytime we make these I-based statements, I think sometimes it's exploring the role, what's going on in that moment for us in a deeper level. What are we, kind of feeling that we're resisting presenting in the world, with the ultimate goal then to be to integrate it and to not only internally allow all of us to be okay, but to get to a space and a time and maybe have some relationships in our world where we can present all of us to those people.
And the ego work that you present, what are some tools the way that you approach it? I know conscious base, so the observation and the awareness. Are there any other maybe reinforcing daily tools when that happens with the meditation?
Absolutely. I think this is a great space where we could begin to talk about using affirmations, using new ways to think about ourselves, because probably what happened when we started to sanction off these more shadowed parts of us, we developed negative narratives around those parts of us, what that meant about us as a person. And starting at a surface level, I believe most of us have developed a habit of judging our thoughts even. We make our thoughts good or bad. We make those to be a reflection of us being a good or a bad person. So I think the same goes. We have all of these negative narratives around the self that we've practiced. We've practiced speaking to ourselves in a negative way. That's the way that I frame it. We've fired up some neural networks in our brain, in this way that's unhelpful. So I think this is a beautiful time and a place to begin to use affirmations that, of course, we're not going to believe at first. And whenever I introduce affirmation work or subconscious work with clients, I acknowledge this reality, because we've practiced thinking negative thoughts about ourselves for so long. So it's understandable that we're not going to believe these new affirmations. And I say that because I think a lot of times affirmations are one of those things that gets this woo-woo slack oh, how, of course, okay, now I'm suddenly good enough. I don't believe I'm good enough. Well, of course you don't believe you're good enough, because you've practiced a version of not good enough self-speech for too long. So aside from, like I said, pulling that attention away and really starting to weaken through neuroplasticity those negative narratives, I think affirmation work can be really, really beautiful. Then with the extension of affirmation work, beginning to practice showing up in the world. And that's always the two part that I'm always talking about too, Lacy, because I don't think that there's magical tools. I don't think those are magical. I promote something that I call a future self journal. It's not magic. We can't journal, close it, and then expect poof to be a new human.
Totally.
We can't manifest or practice affirmations, one time here and there, and
takes
expect
work.
those to really change our life on that daily basis. So not only do we have to practice consistent consciousness throughout our day, or else our subconscious will take over and call the shots for us. When we talk about affirmations and manifestation work, I believe it has to be a more consistent practice, or else I just don't think you're going to get the full effect that can be had, and that is incredible and incredibly empowering, as I know when you do start to see these changes actually set in.
Absolutely. And I think the real through line that we're detecting in which I love, I want to use this word because I think it's important, but your prescription, because it's so, and I might be way too bold saying that, it's so vastly different than, somebody who has gone the same academic route as you, but base one prescription is recognize the awareness through consciousness and continue to reaffirm over and over. So it's repetition are the two things that I'm seeking that I hope people are hearing are very, very important. I have a selfish tangent to go on, actually.
Please.
Number one, something I've been philosophizing lately is I feel like I've done a lot of, our terminology is so similar and we obviously think the exact same thing. And so I always say, the ego is the onion and you're peeling away the layers over and over from what, we created through shadow. And so I feel like I don't think the work truthfully is ever done in my life.
No,
I mean, some people
I'm looking for that utopian hammock in the sky where I can throw my peace signs. Maybe it's in Topanga and be done, but I haven't found the tree yet.
Let me
where
tell
that's gonna
you,
hang, and
once you get here, your shit still comes up. So, But I have done enough peeling to where I do have space, is what I like to call it, like space where I can create a real frame of mind. And I think that's really powerful and fun.
Yes.
You know, when you created enough space in your subconscious where it's very receptive to what I want to direct it to. My trust muscle, like you're saying, is very strong through building it, through showing a lot of seeing is believing that I am safe. This is okay. I've healed maybe these things. So now I'm like philosophizing on this one. What is, and I think it varies for people, but I can't find, and this is going to tie into the affirmation point, what's the frame of mind that we can continue to reaffirm, you know? And so that's the thing I'm sort of searching for.
What do you mean when you say frame of mind?
I do the work that most people in this community do, you know, where it's like what the process we use is hypnosis to get in there and bring the subconscious forward, you know, and peel things back or work on whatever triggers coming up. So after I do my meditation and that in the morning, I'm pretty clear, right? If a lot of things aren't coming up and hitting me, I have this space where I'm not neutral, but my subconscious isn't running wild. It's not taking me on all of these triggered journeys all day long. I practice so much mindfulness that I now have this room to kind of stick in any frame of mind I want to continue to reinforce over and over. But I can't figure out what that is, like what to plug in. And I think the answer might be that it'll probably vary for everybody, but this is a new thing that I'm philosophizing.
No, I love that. Honestly, Lacy, the word that popped up twice when you were speaking, once in the beginning when I was unsure, and then when I got it's flexibility. And I think that might speak to, because I do agree with you. I do think that everyone's new baseline. Yeah. So something you'll often hear me say is creating a new self.
Great.
Right. And I think and some people are like, well, what do you mean? Isn't there an authentic self beneath it all? And I think what I mean when I say that is yes and no. Yeah. Right. So there's an expansive consciousness that lives beneath it all, but within that is flexibility for what I believe is creation. So that word just comes up with the mindset is one of openness to then be able to, because I think some mindsets that I now are very much known societally, right? We can think of abundance mindset, growth mindset,
positivity, whatever.
Am I popping those sort of, filters in and so to make room for whatever it might be for you, that might be different for me, that might be different for the listeners. Maybe it is that baseline. And I love the other word that came to mind is objectivity. And you said, so I like, that expansiveness in that space is being able to just view things as they are and then maybe making room for whatever mindset shift it is.
I love that. Something that even came up yesterday, I was doing one of what I call them deep imaginings, the hypnosis. And and I think you'll appreciate this, but I got down, a trigger I was working on was just like how I was feeling in my body and, stuff I'm dealing with in fertility. And all of a sudden at the bottom of it, I realized, and it's so interesting, I've never put this one together, but the true root, because I suffer from endocrine things and autoimmune and stuff. And at the very bottom, I went, whoa, every caretaker female growing up in my life had body issues and they were sick in some capacity. So it was always depression, always in bed. Everybody had an illness. My grandmother had Alzheimer's when I was 8. But I was like, whoa, I've never seen, or I didn't when I was young, health. Normalcy modeled to me. And then I've had this thing happen ever since I worked with this one healer. His name's Howard. We can link him below. He's in Kauai, but this just started happening to me because I do TM daily, Vedic. And I've only reached once that pure consciousness, feeling everybody, pure love, but now it's happening every day. And I'm like, whoa. So at the bottom of that, not to get too off tangent, I went, what if I peel all of this away? I just want to look at what's there. And so like the visualization that came up was like no physical form, no traits of self or things that have been learned. And what came was just vast black. And then I got to sit with myself, just energy, but nothing put on it, like no personality, nothing, just the energy. And that's so interesting that you're saying flexibility, because that's the space I want to work with. And I love that, seeing the world as it is, the flexibility to put in what I'm needing wherever, and playing with that, but also being objective. And I think that could benefit anybody, is that flexibility.
100%. And I'm having very much a reaction on 2 levels, because Similarly to you, my models of health were very much lacking. Mother who's chronically ill, rampant anxiety, sister who's chronically ill in my family. But also the reaction I was having to that blackness is how I think maybe some listeners, or when we think of that, it can be really destabilizing. That feeling can go two ways, I think.
Oh, sure.
It can be that black, empty hole of I'm nothing, I'm not existent.
Absolutely.
But I think the other side of that is incredible empowerment, because something I've been doing and living in my own journey or trying to pull out the conditioning of one of the things that I would do coming from my very chaotic feeling family environment to protect myself, keep myself safe, the word you used emotionally, was to dissociate.
Yeah.
And the effect that that has had in my life is lack of connection to the collective, or to first one other human, let alone the collective. So my more recent stage of my healing has been through my journaling and just through my daily acts of trying to connect with the collective in a very more active way. And like you're saying, being that love. So for me, when I hear that it's cool to acknowledge in myself what once would have been that black hole of empty, because I didn't feel there was anything beneath, or there wasn't a me in there. Again, this all ties back into my family environment, not being seen as a me. How could I feel that there was a me there? I got a little bit chills when I thought that. Is so empowering in my own world to truly feel that shift, that to me now indicates that collective energy connection that I'm seeking, and not that hole of empty despair that I think for some of us it can feel.
Yeah. And for you, when you're doing the work, in your practice of connecting with the collective, what does that look like for a very sensitive person like myself, for instance? It makes me, and it's all coming back to, what we're talking about is protection, but it makes me get exhausted thinking of that. How do you have that practice in a healthy way, or what are you seeing and visualizing that allows you to give that pure love and that connection with all? I love that practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it's interesting because I think it shifted a bit from being my protected self in the room. When I first started my clinical journey, I was quite savvy at being able to keep myself contained over here and show up in connection with the person, or as in much connection with the person that I was working with across from me. But it wasn't myself fully in the room. Some of it was a function of the clinical work that I was doing. I don't necessarily think it would have been appropriate for me to be all me and out in the room when I was working with other humans in that way. So for me, the evolution has become, and now that I'm working much more holistically, much more on a consultant basis, I have more space to be in the room. So for me, it was unpacking and unlearning, that old protective and almost clinically appropriate, kind of separation,
professional,
to just now being a bit more free, which does then take a different energetic toll. Not that I didn't wear the toll of it, because keeping myself contained to show up as the blank slate in the room is energetically draining. But now it's a new type of experience, because now I'm showing up as myself in a bit more free of a way. And I do feel the different energy drain that then takes. And it just means, not only being present with the other human in front of me, speaking from a place of empathy or ability to assume other people's perspective about what may or may not be going on. Most of us are not going to share the same reality of even
completely
an exchange between two people. Both of us could leave and feel like that was a completely different session that was just had. But it's just being as present as possible, being as empathetic as possible, and entering both of those spaces and then retaining myself and then leaving. I do agree with you that it takes a bit out each of those interactions in a different way.
That's a great way to answer that. Can you explain because you're creating a model that I haven't seen exist before, what that looks like for you, your whole model of interacting with people and functioning, and how you came to it, your journey?
Absolutely. So like I was saying earlier, in terms of the inner child work, the body of us humans was largely absent in my training program. So when I left school, I felt very equipped to be a standard talk therapist. You would come, we would talk from conscious space, talk about insights. You would go forth and try to break the patterns or resolve the symptoms that you were
or awareness
seeing in your life, right? So what I started to realize, so as a human, a little bit of background for me is I was incredibly anxious as a child. Anxiety was part of my daily experience. And quite honestly, I thought was going to be about managing. I thought my conversation with my own anxiety throughout my life was going to be managing my anxiety, same ways, through therapy, through medication. I've been on medication in my past. So everything that I was prescribing, to use that word again, to the clients that I was working with, I was doing myself. And I felt I was coming up short in my own anxiety. My anxiety would spike throughout my life, almost become unmanageable at times. My 20s were one panic attack after another. And then as I entered my 30s, more of the same. My anxiety was right below the surface. I was seeing all of these not so helpful patterns in my life and in my relationship. I started to have really scary physical symptoms. I started to faint, forget what I was saying mid-sentence. So I did not know what was going on, but I was noticing as well that the work that I was doing with my clients was mirroring my own experience. Lots of stuckness, lots of insight had per each session, but then I'd come back and I get a report of how everything pretty much looked the same between sessions. So when I got scared, quite honestly, what motivated me into changing my lifestyle in a pretty drastic way was I got scared. I went online and I started to see all of this new information that I wasn't told about in school, about the body, about gut health, about physiological imbalances. I mean, I don't even think that, the word epigenetics or psychoneuroimmunology and all of these concepts were not spoken about in school that I started to put together were part of the reason why I was physically struggling as I was. So I made some lifestyle changes. I started to feel better physically, but I also started to feel better within my anxiety. My anxiety started to
What were some of those lifestyle changes, just for the person who might be resonating?
Absolutely. So my nutrition was a big part. I'm someone who thought that I was very health conscious, but I started to realize that the food that I was eating more consistently than that was helpful was causing gut damage. So I got really clear on the diet that worked the best for me. I'm very much a proponent of intuitive eating. So connecting with your body. So I did a whole lot of nutritional work within myself and within my daily eating choices to figure out what my body felt best in. I was shocked at how some of the symptoms in terms of my energy and my mental fog went away as I started to remove some of these foods. Sleep, another really big issue. I don't think a lot of us are sleeping to our needs that we have. So I got my sleep in order. That meant changing my bedtime to an earlier time, getting up a bit earlier. It meant this was a process too. This is an overnight.
Oh no,
literally overnight that where our sleep is back in track because I struggled with sleep. Yeah, this is one I begrudged having this be the truth, but it is, in my opinion, movement. I got myself moving a bit more frequently than I think I was wanting to move. So those are, I think, the big three that come in terms of the lifestyle based. The bridge between the body and the mind that I got myself good and consistent using is breath work. I think for those of us who lack safety, who are living in an overactive nervous system, a lot of us do check that box. That is a large contributor to the symptoms that we're having or our stuck points, is that we're just in a nervous system that's not helpful to our human body. So for me, that meant, and that I always call that as the bridged gap, because it's something I can choose to do in my mind and then actually affect physiological change in my body. So,
and anybody tuning in too, you even have those saved on your highlights, right?
Yes, I have very easy, quick. I'm a big proponent, Lacy, of practical, because I know that these are tools that we have to integrate into our life. I give a lot of great, simple ways to begin to just teach your body how to breathe in a new way that will be beneficial. And the clients that I work with, when I actually just opened up an email this morning before I came here of a client who sent me a check-in who struggles with pervasive anxiety, very similar to my own story, who started to use breath work, I think within the past couple of weeks even, and is starting to already see a noticeable difference and has actually been able to exchange, which is really cool, late night snack binging. He would be in the fridge, rooting for snacks and soothing in the middle of the night. And now for the past, I think 10 days, he said he's woken in the middle of the night, but has used breath work to bring his body back down and is not right at the fridge. Incredibly important is breath work. And then part of my journey was really getting clear because, again, the subconscious, while it's part of our mind, is absent in any of the traditional training that I was given. So for me, it was really starting to localize, and you and I are very much in agreement of that being a really impactful reason why the word stuck. I can't even count the amount of times I hear that. And that's what I was seeing then in working in that traditional way. And I think for all of those reasons, this new holistic world where we're looking at the whole person, the body, the lifestyle interventions, and the power of the subconscious needs to, in my opinion, be incorporated into the mental wellness field. Because I think without it, you're going to have a lot of not only humans on the other side of the couch, but practitioners feeling similarly to the way I did, which is stuck right alongside in their personal lives, but also in their clinical work. I don't think people are getting better, because I think that we just need to expand the way that we're conceptualizing and then therefore treating.
Absolutely. And I think that's the biggest thing we hear all the time. And we're huge proponents. We're like, please do this work side by side with your therapist or your support group or your whatever. But I mean, it's countless. It's almost like we could make this a marketing campaign of people who are like, I did 10 years of talk therapy, and one of the workshops I had like breakthroughs. It was like 10 years of therapy at once. And it's really getting down to this, looking at the entire picture, really getting, and I think the biggest is just finding change. I think that's the big plight people feel when they're in traditional talk therapy is nothing changes. There's great awareness, but nothing's changing. So, I mean, I really applaud you for bringing this.
So I'm quickly interrupting this episode to invite you, if you're ready to start your manifestation journey, or if anything you've heard in our manifestation episodes has piqued your interest to begin. We have a la carte workshops in everything from the basics bundle, which is what we recommend to everyone who starts. It's the formula that actually teaches you how to manifest, unblocked inner child, and unblocked shadow. We also have a la carte workshops on love and money. But the real gem is the Pathway membership, because it encompasses every single workshop we have. It's a year-long membership with full access to the few a la carte offerings we have, and exclusive workshops not available anywhere else, such as the daily practice, which is what everybody in the Pathway uses, hopefully at least 3 times a week to daily, in order to truly create the new neural pathways that one needs in order to manifest, and houses the library of our deep imaginings, which is our unique hypnosis process that allows you to get into your subconscious and overwrite those old neural pathways, creating the new ones. You can use our special code EXPANDED, all caps, EXPANDED, to receive $20 off your first a la carte workshop purchase, or $20 off your first month of the Pathway. Again, that's all caps, EXPANDED, EXPANDED. Okay, now back to the episode.
I've been in my comments are always mentions of the impact that your workshop has had for my followers as well. Very in similar ways, I went through all, and the reason is I think, I know this, you sit face to face with a therapist and you're talking from conscious mind. Yeah. You can be incredibly insightful. You can even come with the best plan. Yeah. You know what I mean? The best plan for what you're going to do next, the next time that thing comes up for you. But then the next time that thing comes up for you, if you're not practicing these skills to stay in that conscious state, you're just going to fall right back into that rut, and your subconscious is going to deploy that same reaction, and then you're going to come back in. And I honestly think, I say this to my clients too, I prepare them at the onset of this journey. Great. There's two spikes, as I call it, in discomfort when you heal in this way. The first spike is going to come when you become conscious of yourself, of your internal world, of others in your world. When you open your eyes, whoa, it's a lot. It's not always the most pretty and comfortable experience. So that's a spike. And then honestly, Lacy, I see another spike in that interim, because when you're still stuck in some of those moments and you're so aware of yourself, I think that also contributes to incredible frustration. Oh, beyond. And I think that's another spike. And I think a lot of times the people that I would work with, and me as well, I lived a lot of my life in that interim where I felt like I was very aware of a lot of aspects of myself, but in those moments, my subconscious dictated what I did. And then I felt even worse after the facts. And I think we start to think things like, oh, I should know better. Why isn't this working? What the hell am I spending all this time and money for in therapy? And I'm still living these patterns. But like I said, I don't think, and you agree with me, until we start to speak and work with the subconscious in a more consistent way, unfortunately, that's going to be, I think, the route.
Absolutely. What is your perspective on, we alluded to it before, shadow, but shadow work? What can you say to any of our people that are doing shadow work, just to help support them further in their journey? Our shadow workshop is obviously very targeted at manifestation. It's like, I believe energetically, in order to attract more, or you have to be able to be seen, you have to be whole. And so that's like something that I would love to offer them, or any tiny tools or thought processes or anything you suggest around shadow work to support.
Absolutely. I agree with you too. I mean, the language I even give to emotions is I connect everything with energy. And how is our energy flowing through our bodies? How is it not? How is it stuck? How is it changing? We talk about manifesting. I think the biggest part about shadow work is self-acceptance, first and foremost, is gaining the place in your own internal world before you even show up as all of you in your environments. I think it's, as all things, internal work, right? It's becoming okay and breaking what is for a lot of us the habit of self-judgment, of the shoulds. I shouldn't be this person. This is a thought I shouldn't have. I shouldn't feel this negative feeling in this way, in this situation. Questioning that, why not? And breaking the habit, I think, of judging, and allowing you to just be a bit more comfortable within your own shadow. And then by extension, I believe you become a bit more comfortable showing up wholly in the world.
So when you have that trigger come up about something, say a great one for me growing up, the only thing women in my family were ever loved for or received accolade in was being beautiful, and being a certain weight and all of that. So I still, then having been an actress and a model, there's just a lot there that I'm always working through in body image and being okay with where my body is at right now, trying to get pregnant. It's obviously, I'm embodying a different part of me. So I'm doing a lot of work around that with our tools. So when that trigger comes up, for instance, say, like I'm feeling this way in my body or bloated or blah, 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 and I'm about to go through that negative space. What do you suggest right then and there based on what you're saying? It's like acknowledging and then questioning and accepting.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. Question. And I think I always go back and forth within my mind too, and there's no formula for this, but you brought up the word acceptance. I think it is finding a balance, even in a conversation like that within ourselves, where some days our bodies aren't going to feel great, period. Right. So aside from the messaging that you've been given and internalized about what that means about you and how to show up in the world or not show up in the world, the reality of it is sometimes we don't feel great. And I think it's finding the place to honor that more intuitive sense, but finding the balance between that and shifting forward and knowing when that's coming from that more internalized belief mentality. Because I think sometimes in some occasions in your body and your hormones you might not feel good some days, and that just might be okay. And your goal in those moments will be to honor your low energy or whatever, your body in whatever state it's in as it is changing or preparing for a change, and honoring it. So I say that because I think the work isn't always about removing it entirely so that it's not there, because I think that our intuition and our body and everything is going to speak always, and we need to be able to honor it when it's coming from that place, separate from when it's coming from that internalized, more externally driven, what will people think of me? How will I be accepted and loved place in the world? And unfortunately, I haven't found the formula that we can all kind of input ourselves in and know this is that difference and this is that. So I think it's our internal journey of separating that out between what is it that is my intuition and that I need to honor and accept, and what of it is that onion that I could continue to work to peel back.
I love that. And that sense of awareness around that too. You've mentioned intuition a few times, and I would love to hear more about how you work with yours. You're obviously intuitively eating. It's helping you through this process. What are some of the teachings you have around intuition while approaching this?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, I believe connecting. Like I said, we all come, as I say it, to this planet with intuition.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, one of two things happen. We either become so disconnected, and the way I conceptualize it, so that you can't see me out there, but I conceptualize it in my body. It's a body-based guidance system, which to me is the disconnect happens when we start to spend way too much time in our thinking mind, living from the top down way of processing experience. So a step toward re-engaging that is spending as much time in the present moment, grounded in my body, allowing myself to rebuild, for some of us, that connection to be able to then hear, quote unquote, if you will, my intuition speak in the way that it speaks. And I say this because I do not believe that I joke when I say this, but I mean this. I don't think our best decisions come from our thinking mind. We are gifted with thought and planning and troubleshooting and every beautiful thing that
learning
our thought can provide us. But I think more often than not, many of us look up there for us to solve, especially our bigger questions. Who am I supposed to be with? Where am I supposed to be in this life? Where is my path, my journey, my passion? That I think comes. So first and foremost, rebuilding that connection. And then the word you and I have both referenced, trusting it, is the next step of it. Totally. So we can hear it and not trust it as well. So for me, it's really interesting because I look back over my course of life experiences and I can see the moments where I had my intuition active and I knew something to be true. I didn't know what was going on or what it was I was speaking, but looking back, I consider myself, I've always been quite an intuitive person, but I evolved into a habit of overriding my intuition because of what logically made sense or what I could see being the case, or maybe even based on an old script that wasn't working. So for my journey was spending less time. So the dissociative place that I would go to that I used to so fondly call was my spaceship. So it was retiring the spaceship and spending more time grounded in myself. Totally. So that's a suggestion because I think a lot of people similarly are just too disconnected from that part of ourself that is where our intuition is housed, that then could speak to us. So the more we stay grounded, stay in our bodies, we're going to set ourselves up to hear our intuition speak. And then it's showing up in the world and listening and showing ourselves that we can trust that dialogue. What are some of the practices you use to reconnect with your intuition? So for me,
like actionable.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, it's sometimes it's finding a space where we can access ourself. Okay. For me, nature has always been that. It's the most intuitive space that I can go to. And without knowing what it was doing for me, it was helping me to ground and made presence in the current moment a bit more accessible, because I did struggle with being fully present in the moment. So a good actionable item, those of you listening, is find the place that might already be existing in your world. For some, it's art, it's music. Where can you just flow, is I think the state that a lot of us maybe have heard it discussed as. Where can you just drop in a bit easier into that present moment? Finding that space, spending time there. That's an actionable item. That mindfulness muscle, really, I call it a muscle because we all choose. Oh, absolutely. We all have choice where our attention goes, but a lot of us have a wimpy muscle. So for me, it was really an actionable step to get good and consistent, even though I struggled and I resisted it a lot in the beginning, having a more structured practice where I sit and I meditate and I really practice using that muscle, that then I expand it to using that muscle throughout my day. And beyond nature, which was a bit more approachable for me, how can I be mindfully present when I'm eating so that I can connect with my body's intuition about when it's full or what it does well on or what it doesn't do well on? Can I just build in more mindful moments where I'm interacting with someone else so I can start to build that connection to the human and the collective, and then using that practically, I think were my biggest tools.
I love that. I think that's so, we get that question more than anything because we talk about following your ping, that's going to lead you. And a lot of people are like, how can I decipher between a ping or a thought or I'm forcing?
Yes.
Do you have a note
all
on
the
that?
time? I get that question all of the time. How do I know? Because the reality of it is, Lacy, as you and I know, think a thought long enough, you get a ping type experience.
Boy,
You have a feeling.
Don't call the ex.
Right. So, you know what I mean? So it is confusing. So it starts by more connection, shaving off that onion where you can see the stories. We're very patterned.
Yeah.
We tend to have the same stories that are inducing the same feelings. Something I talk about, I term it emotional addiction. All that means to me is the feeling that I'm most used to feeling, my familiar. For me, that was anxiety. That was chaos. That was on edge. Even though consciously, what I would tell you, all I wanted was peace, that hammock in the sky, right? But when I was in those moments, it was so uncomfortable because it was so unfamiliar. So for me, it was hard to decipher. Am I actually being anxious about something that I need to worry about? Because I think a lot of questioners, when we get that, are concerned. Am I going to open myself up for danger, abuse, threat, violations of any sort? And my statement always is that intuition that we were gifted with in the beginning is there. It has always been there. Our job is to continue to peel back that onion of those stories, of very patterned ways of being that have induced a very familiar feeling in us that is separate from that intuition. I think the more you practice self-observation, the more you get to see how patterned those narratives and then those feelings are, so that you can get clarity. Okay, this is just that nervous anxiety I always feel in this situation. So probably safe situation, old story that I can lose.
Completely.
Right.
Oh, I love that. Really, really, really helpful for everybody. What are some ways we can catch ourselves in emotional cycles, which is kind of what you're talking about right now, and how can we work to get out of them?
Look at that perfect lead-in question.
Basic,
I like it. I like it though. So learn the cycle.
Yeah.
We are very cycled. So like I would say, what would happen and why I call it an addiction, it's not that I was seeking a positive emotion of anxiety, but what I would catch myself doing was when I had a calm moment, maybe I was even in a calm place like nature, or nothing was happening really that could provoke anxiety. I would start to notice that I would feel uncomfortable in some way. And one of two things would happen. And this is the power of the subconscious as I see it. I would start to have endless thoughts of all of the things that I could or should be worrying about. I call that mental chatter.
So normal for everyone.
What was that?
That's so normal for everybody in this situation.
So I'm sitting here and I have nothing to worry about. All my boxes are maybe checked, but my mind would produce a thought that if I spent enough time with it intentionally, I'd work myself up into an anxious feeling that I was used to. Or, so sorry, my past partners out there.
I know, same.
Agitate, stir the pot if someone was around me just enough
for friction
that now I had that exact same experience of that spiral that I was used to. Some version of anxiety, depending on how extreme I pushed it, I could even throw myself into a panic attack because I was used to it. So the first and foremost tool that I use, that I suggest we all use out there, is to get clear on ourselves, get radically honest, if you will. Start to see your patterns in this way, because patterns are speakers, they're tools, there's information there that we can learn from. And then being able to identify when you're finding yourself in that emotional spiral that's more thought-induced, because you've now come online and beginning to see the role that your internal dialogues have played in inducing that spiral, now you have a point of intervention.
Totally.
Now you can do something different than engaging with that spiral. But in the interim, that spiral will be there. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just about operating in a new way within that spiral.
And do you ever, because one that I notice that's very, especially is having a very chemical reaction in my body, with cortisol and everything, is even when everything's perfectly fine and safe, like you're suggesting, I'll have I'm still protecting myself from things, because that's how I grew up. And this is actually where the philosophizing of plugging in a new frame of mind has sort of come up, and now realizing I have space to do that as we're talking about that pinnacle point where I can go down the chatter, or I can stop and plug in this new and have a response because it's something that I've done subconscious work on and understand there's space to, implement in that. Mine, it's just safety. And yours, it's the same thing. Safety. So for you in those moments, those are the tools that you end up using. It's
breath work too also comes to mind, because breath work is the way. So I navigate it from two levels.
Okay.
Getting out of the story that's causing the internal agitation will over time calm the experience of the body. However, to speak to your point, our body has now by this point released cortisol and adrenaline and has shifted physiologically in a way that has a longer shelf life. Those chemicals are going to be there for a bit longer until my body metabolizes them and then returns naturally back to that parasympathetic or that peaceful, safe state. So another tool to use in that acute moment so that I can build the balance from the body up, as I call it, is a tool like breath work. So by consciously breathing from that deep belly area is the number one way I suggest, because it's easy. It's
I love
secret.
that.
If people are around me, they don't have to know I'm even doing it. I'm not doing anything with my hands and my alternate nostril or counting in, or I do Wim Hof every morning looking like I'm hyperventilating in a corner. You know what I mean? So a couple deep belly breaths. And the goal then is my body can recalibrate, can go over into that more parasympathetic state, can allow those hormones to metabolize a bit quicker, and can also, because our body and our mind are interconnected, the problem with us having and living in that overactive nervous system is that our mind detects it. So it's scanning and it's receiving information from our body and its systems. And if I am still agitated physiologically, my mind is going to try to make sense of that agitation, which then just causes another round of mental spinning. So if we're using both of those tools, staying grounded in my body, that I'm bringing my body to calm by my deep belly breaths, then I can almost snip that uptake that's going to happen, where my mind's going to be like, well, your body's still nervous. What are you nervous about? Oh, right. This is the thing you're nervous about, or that thing over here. And now I'm just caught in another mental loop.
Totally.
And I think that's why we become locked.
I imagine too, the more you do that, you catch it at that moment and do it, the response time becomes a lot quicker.
Yes. And you know what? I love that you brought that up, because we all know there's a point of no return. Yeah. When I'm at that 8 or that 9, forget it. Yeah. I'm going to run. I'm going to be in a complete spiral. So that's why, again, being so consistently self-observational allows us to pick up on our patterns, to really intervene on ourselves at a time earliest enough that we're not going to lose that control.
And then self-regulate with such a beautiful tool.
That gives us the ability, the space. I love to use your language, because we lose that space. That space gets minimized as we go up that 10-point scale of emotions. We start to lose that choice. And our goal, as I say it, is to always retain that choice in that space.
So head over to Nicole's Instagram if you're looking for some breathwork practices you can do literally in those moments. Absolutely. Because that's brilliant. It's something you can do in a doctor's office. You can do at work. Anywhere. I
actually retrained, so I struggled big time. Even practicing a deep belly breath, I had to lay down, my posture. I still wear a lot of my own history in my body, working on it. But for me, it was really hard. So this is my little motivation out there for everyone. Yeah. I now consistently, even when I'm working out, breathe from my belly-based area. So I've completely retrained. And that's the beautiful part of our body. Not only is our brain neuroplastic, our body is trainable.
Totally.
So it learned. So now I spend most of my time in that parasympathetic. I still catch myself.
Yeah.
When I'm stressed, I either resist breathing and I don't breathe as readily and as naturally, or I'll start to notice my breath becoming a bit more shallow. But that's my little motivation and inspiration out there, because if I can retrain the way my belly and my body breathed on a more consistent basis, anyone out there really can do it. And I think it's incredibly empowering when you can, and it gives you just control back. So anyone listening, especially if you have anxiety and panic, living it, I know how out of control it feels. So this is another kind of empowerment tool, as I see it.
And free. It's totally free. You don't have to buy anything for it. You can do it anywhere. I mean, that's brilliant.
Anywhere, anytime.
Really practical. This is a fun one. So let's talk about emotional enmeshment. This is something we talk about a lot too in our work. And I grew up incredibly enmeshed with my mom. Can you give us some background on what that can look like? So how a person identifies and how we can best build boundaries with our children to avoid becoming that.
Yes, absolutely. I think that emotional enmeshment, I know we all hear that term enmeshment. I think it really does. Emotional enmeshment is very predominant in small ways. So whether it's messages that we were given in childhood, direct or indirect. So sometimes children are told things like, don't do that, or dad will be angry, sad, etc. Mom will be That's a message, if you really hear what it's saying, is me and my behavior is responsible for someone else's emotions. Now, of course, those listening, yes, people can have emotional reactions to the way other people are in the world. But the more you hear that and internalize that message, that's, I think, the problem as I see it with those of us. And I think a lot of us have come from that more enmeshed family, emotionally enmeshed family, is the more you hear that and practice that belief, the more you do become now an adult who feels responsible, and the way this shows up in adulthood. And I have a million clients who say things like, I'm a caretaker, I'm a helper, I'm always worried
codependent.
about other, or just straight up, I'm codependent. I'm always worried about someone else and their needs. And it starts, I believe, with that sort of messaging or lived experience. Maybe it's not even as direct. You just see or feel. Again, we're very attuned creatures, even as little children. You can see and feel the effects that you're having on your caregivers, just your way of being in the world or not being in the world. You maybe watch that sort of behavior modeled within your parents if they're together, if you're seeing any relationships existing. I always point up. It's funny because I'm like a little kid looking up in the adults around me, but you're watching maybe people that are living in that more codependent end of the spectrum relate. And that's how you're getting another layer of messaging about how to show up in relationships. And then you show up. I actually just did a video on YouTube where I talk a bit about emotional enmeshment in families, and I give a bunch of examples so that you guys can check that out on my YouTube channel. We can link that below. Absolutely. Yeah. But I think a lot of us struggle with it. I know I did. I know a lot of the messaging and a lot of the ways that I would navigate my relationships as an adult were based on that belief that I was responsible for everyone around me's feelings. And so first and foremost, I think if anyone out there listening can relate to the worn, kind of self maybe designated title of a helper or a caretaker, or if you start to see that everyone else's emotional needs are a priority on your list, then chances are you might have lived some of this messaging growing up. And it's a hard process to be able to separate that out and to start to assume responsibility first for ourselves before we can show up then for someone else in a relationship. And for me, a really pivotal moment happened years ago now. And it was over something really silly, like where I would spend, say, an upcoming holiday. And I was speaking with someone and I was going through a litany of where everyone else wanted or needed me to be for this particular day. And the person very calmly and very understandably looked at me and said, well, what do you want, Nicole? And I had no idea. So from the practicality of where I would spend my time for that holiday, but below that wasn't just where I would spend my time. It's how would everyone react to where I chose to spend my time? So what I was doing was a version of that enmeshment or that emotional worry about others. Because if I picked place A, how would B, C, and D think about me picking place A, and would I hurt their feelings? But when that person asked me and I had no idea, I at that point knew that this was something I had to look at, because I then was able to identify a complete lifelong pattern in myself of not asking myself what I wanted, whether or not it was logistically how I want to spend my day, let alone what do I need emotionally in this moment or in this relationship, and furthermore, are they getting met, those emotional needs? And the answer was no, because I was so focused outward and not at all focused inward.
And for you, how did that unraveling look? What was that process? What can people expect? How long? How much reinforcement?
Absolutely. So a lot of my process was internal, was tuning into myself, was learning myself, was meeting myself, learning myself. I didn't even know, and this came up a lot very early on in my relationship, my partner would notice. First, she would speak about it in terms of my family. Your family doesn't seem to have interests or passions or things that are their own, separate, where, mom goes and does this and dad goes and does that. And then by extension, she would start to alert me that she wasn't really seeing me operate in those ways as well. So as I started my healing journey, just tuning into me and identifying whether it's things I was interested in, how I chose to spend my time on any given day, what I liked, and then digging down deeper, feelings, emotions, things like that. So a big part of my journey was meeting myself, discovering for myself, me, my needs, my wants, And then the next part of the journey, which is equally as hard, is learning how to show up in the world now, which meant shifting the way I was in some of my relationships, shifting the dynamics through the word that we love to hate, boundaries. Learning not to continually show up as, because that's the responsibility that I believe we each hold for ourselves. If I am showing up as a helper and a caretaker in a way that is energetically draining, or maybe not giving me the relationship experiences that I want to see myself having, maybe not being as fulfilling for me, it's not their responsibility to stop expecting me to show up in that way. Why would they? If I've showed up in that way my whole life with them, whomever the relationship is, that's how they're going to continue to expect me. That's our dynamic. It can be changed, but it's my responsibility. So then that meant practically stopping those old patterns and not showing up for everyone else first, which meant putting up no's or tuning into myself and how much energy I had available to someone else on a given day or wherever in the world. So I think that's a 2-part process, getting clear internally and then showing up in the world in a more emotionally independent way, which does sometimes include shifting the way we show up in relationships.
I think the hardest thing that triggers when people hear the process of boundaries is how to communicate them. You know, like even I catch myself as somebody who grew up enmeshed, as somebody who's codependent. I'm on the other opposite side of the spectrum who's avoidant. So I'm like that, where it's like, I don't want, you know, but I still find myself something as simple as, you know, telling, what is it? Like an appointment I had, you know, instead of being like, I'm not going to do this or whatever way to consciously communicate that. I'll be like, I have to head up to the retreat. I make up an elaborate story. So
I may not have done that 1,000,001 times.
Totally. I mean, it's so, you know, it's totally symptomatic of this, and it's so hard and deep. What does that process look like? You know, maybe you have a few terms or ways we can answer to consciously communicate boundaries.
100%. Because the 3 steps that I even talk about with boundaries is, like I was just saying, get clear, communicate, uphold. So in terms of communicating, objective language, I think, is a great tool to use. The more objectively you can state, so as opposed to saying, you're crazy, I can't come, right? Very objectively, this is, you know, your limit, right? So when this happens, I will no longer. If this continues, I will have to, right? Very much I focus, not you pointing fingers, because the person on the other end can be reactive to the boundary.
Oh, and the shadow,
They're going to be reactive regardless of whether or not you word it in the most perfectly objective way. However, I do think that objective language, avoiding you do this and I won't, you know, type of language, I think can be helpful. Also, having a conversation or making the communication at a time where neither party, to the best of our ability, at the start of the conversation, is emotionally activated. So not throwing this out in a fit of upset over the latest conflict in the relationship. I also say both parties, because sometimes I might have prepared and I'm in a great, and I know exactly what I want to say, and I'm nice and calm and zen, and I just meditated and I'm ready to deliver the message to my partner who just came through the door and is in a tizzy because they just had the worst day at work. Even though it's ideal for me, probably not going to be the best time. However, like I said, once the communication is had, then emotions can come to the surface. So it's also, I think, on the back end, knowing when to call it, when to remove yourself, put a pin in the conversation, revisit it at a time and a later date when you are not as emotionally activated. Because if things do start to escalate, if the person doesn't like what they're hearing, or they become, their shadow is triggered themselves, or, you know, they're going to view whatever they're hearing you say through their lens and their narrative. So could not be of any fault of your own, however might be the reality. I do think that there comes a time and a space where distance, allowing both of the brains emotionally to downregulate, to regain access to that conscious center in our frontal lobe, is going to go a long way. But I think the reality of it is, these are hard conversations. Some clients, when they start to implement boundaries, they practice making these more objective communications to allow them to feel somewhat more prepared to have the conversation.
And for something as simple as, like, out to dinner with a friend, you're too tired, those are the places that I struggle the most with. My poor partner, I'm which I'm not doing this consciously enough, but the way that I did grow up in enmeshment and the patterning I had with my mom, I have no problem being so poignant to and objective at times when I am in a more conscious state. But it's really what I struggle with is the outside world. And not being loved, that's the big thing. And, obviously wanting to please and all the things that come with enmeshment. How is it as deep as that? Like really speaking a boundary, or is it I guess I can't get over the whole lying part.
It's hard.
It's
so,
so
and
hard.
honestly, Lacy, what I did, I was going to offer this to her in terms of the practice. I too practice.
Yeah.
I always call it around the periphery orbit. So for you, right, the outside world is probably going to be the core, right? Yeah. For me, it was the closer relationships were a bit more of the core. So I practiced with the outside world first, from the outside in. I practiced saying no without the excuse of why I couldn't.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. The alignment between me evolving as a human and me starting to get a bit more requests professionally. That email.
Do you guys hear that? Everybody, magnetism?
Yeah. Email made it feel really safer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Being behind a screen in a sense. It was still hard though to deliver just a no, I can't, or I will be unable without the why.
Yes.
A why I still included every now and again. I'm busy. This is not my priority. Instead of I'm sick, I'm debilitated, I'm actually flying out of town.
Whatever.
But a more of a me-based why.
Okay.
So I practiced in the way that didn't feel as threatening. It still was scary, but what practice gave me was confidence that either the reaction that I imagined I would get that would be cataclysmic never happened. And the person was like, it's cute too, because most of the people that were requesting things of me had been following me. So they would write back and say, oh, I totally respect your use of boundaries. And I was like,
wonderful.
So they knew exactly. So thank you everyone out there who totally respected my use of early boundaries because I was scared shitless.
Yeah.
But when that big terrible thing, when the person didn't call me a loser and, screw you and I'm never going to make a request
or
again.
energetically hate you.
Yeah. When that didn't happen, that was really confidence building.
Yeah.
And or sometimes when we do get some version of a negative reaction, we can show ourselves confidence in being able to tolerate it. So maybe it sucked, but
it's building a trust muscle, truthfully.
Yeah. Am I past it? Am I okay? Does my life still continue on the next day? Yes. And that's building a trust muscle. And that allowed me to work my orbit in. I still struggle.
Yeah.
I had to actually deliver a really hard communication over this week while I was here. And it's funny. And I had someone that I called for advice on what I should do. Say, give me the offer. Or, it was a guy.
Yeah, of course.
Just say this, that this is the case directly. Or you could just say you're sick. I said, I love that you just said that right now, because only it would have been like, oh, I am with the flu.
Yeah.
I'm in urgent care, but
Totally.
I went with option A, and I still was a little bit scared, but I got practice with doing it. So that's what I think is helpful, working yourself through the orbits. It's really that underlying trust muscle. I love that language that we're trying to build when we're talking about building boundaries.
This is my work right now. This is my new thing I get to play with. Okay, cool. New onion layer to peel.
Yes.
What about for the person who's parenting? They're identifying with this now and they're like, oh my gosh, am I doing this to my child? What are some practices, awarenesses, things they can put in action right now to just start to shift that consciousness?
Yes. I get a lot of amazingly, incredibly conscious seeking parents that either ask me the question or want to work with me. And the big underlying message that I give is healing, self-healing, modeling. There's no quick fix the way I say it, or quick parenting tool where if you're not doing it, the kid is going to see more what you're doing. Kids are observational and are sponges, and do as I say, not as I do is really not the way that it works. Kids are really seeing more of what you're doing. So even if you say the most brilliant conscious building statements to your children, if you're not modeling that, if you're modeling reactivity, if you're modeling worrying about the external world, or whatever it is that you're modeling is more of what's going to impact your children.
Oh, this is a really, is this the quote of the episode? I mean, at the end of the day, I think a really important thing people need to reduce from this for a second, because if the light bulb just went off drastically in my mind, and we say the same thing, we're like, if you want your kids to be magnetic, you have to do to model that. But I think a really important thing to point out that you said, obviously words and communication are so important in parenting, but action sounds like it's really what holds the weight.
Yeah.
Wow, that's something to think about.
Yes, absolutely. It's really I love talking to all the audiences, but I like the alignment that you and I have, because I know when I say things like that, your listeners, they are in agreement with those sort of messages, because I know for some people that these are hard messages.
Yeah.
My little 3-year-old self inside of me did not want a lot of this to be true. Believe you me, I did not want it to be as consistent, daily, effortful choices. Oh, you said work. There you go. Work. Yeah. I was dancing around.
I know.
Choices was my nice neutral way that I put that out there. But in all seriousness, it is. That's what it is. And it's that living our life, and it's that impacting the lives of those around us. And that's just the truth that I am knowing in my soul to be the reality now. But that's, I believe, what it is for parenting as well. So do your own healing, becoming conscious of yourself. If and when you will find yourself, because the parents that I work with do find themselves still with their trigger points that affect the way they react to their children. Something I will always tell people, those deepest wounds that you and I kind of acknowledge are still there, might still always be there, are going to be the areas that you still are going to find yourself triggered. Even once you begin the work, they're going to be there for a bit, which means you might not be so shiny reacting to your children, especially when you don't have the resources, when you've had the long day, when you're physically not feeling well or emotionally exhausted, you might not show up in the best way. Giving yourself the grace that that's part of healing, because sometimes we beat ourselves up. Of course, we don't want to affect hurt on our children. I don't have children. I can't imagine or embody the feeling of having a spawn in the word, in the world. I don't know what it feels like, but I can imagine it's very effortful and very hard emotionally to maybe retrospect, as I put it, kind of doing the postscript play on, how you yelled or screamed or withdrawed from your kid. Doesn't make you feel good, but giving ourselves, I think, a bit of grace. And also communicating.
That
the kid is going to be open. If you come back to your child and little Susie, Johnny, whoever you are, this is what happened for mom. I'm human. I'm working on it. That I believe to be so incredibly impactful, because what I know is true, as I think you do too. That child is going to make up a story in their mind about what happened or didn't happen.
Absolutely.
And based on where they are developmentally, part of the impact that our childhood experiences have on us is the developmental state that our brain is in from birth until, depending on who you read, 7, 8, 9.
I know.
But we're egocentric. Yeah. So that poor little child is going to make up a story, and it's likely going to be them at fault. So if you come after the fact and maybe have a hard conversation, maybe one that you're not used to even having, because I imagine your parent might not have had this conversation with you. So it's going to be walking through a new set of discomfort. However, being able to explain, I think, to your little one what had happened to you humanizes you, makes you relatable, and allows them to then remove themselves from the hook that caused it. And I think that can be incredibly impactful on the other
talk
end.
about, some blocks you can limit in your child's life. And they're going to get their own. I always say all kids are going to be fucked up, that you're going to do something or society's going to, and that's why we're in the human experience. But I think for the person who's feeling parent guilt, or is beating themselves up, that is so simple. It's not so simple to put into practice, but it's simplified enough to sit and process and try to put those things into to practice. I mean, that's huge.
Yes. I also think there's a balance, because I am so excited, honestly, Lacy, to see these younger generations with these conscious parents grow. And I think I'm just excited for the collective at Mass. However, I also know that the attempt at conscious parenting is within a balance too. Some parents now, very well intentioned, I believe, can try to protect.
They go
and
overboard.
To an extent that is impossible.
Yeah.
So again, while I cannot imagine what it would be like to equip a human, send them out to school or the world and know that they're going to be hurt by school and the world.
Totally.
And hopefully giving them the tools to navigate their hurt, one through modeling, you navigating your own hurt. I can't imagine how fearful and a million other things that might come up as a parent. However, that's the reality of it. So even in conscious parenting, I think that there's that middle balance where you model healing, you model having emotions that are uncomfortable for your child, you model coming out the other side of it. And that is, I believe, what equips that now child, adolescent, adult who's going to go out and be hurt by the world to be able to navigate their own emotions in a healthier way.
I think that's so wonderful, to really have some sort of a frame of reference of what that balance can look like. And I think you just outlined that.
A lot of times, not only are we shielded from the not so positive of life, and I lived this experience, what I'm going to say next, I think a lot of times sometimes some of us are shielded. No, but we're also, I think, shielded from the not so positive about ourselves.
Ah, huge.
Too.
Yes.
And I think being able to be honest of being supportive, but also being a bit honest with children. So I listened to Gary Vee, and I know he's very divisive in a lot of ways with his thinking, but he said something that I think really struck me once, and it was about with a child. It might have been his kid, actually, where the kid just wasn't good at basketball. Like, that's just it. You know what I mean? And how he did it in a very nice, eloquent way, but how we kind of just acknowledge, Johnny, or whatever your name is, like, you're not maybe going to be good at everything.
I love that.
That you might want to be good at. So we have two choices. We can either try to get better and accept where we are now, or you could decide that you don't want to do that anymore. That's your choice, Johnny.
Yeah.
But I say that because I lived an experience that I think did not allow me to develop any version of not only emotional awareness, let alone resilience. So a big moniker, the way I was referred to in my childhood environment was the Christ child, was this very endearing name that I was given. And I was very good at sports and school. And I was very praised for being very good at sports and school. And then I was largely left alone. So all of the other not great things that I was for sure doing, I got very good at doing in secret, and I never got caught, if you will. So I was able to uphold this great image. Bottom line though, Lacy, I was never told anything even slightly that I could construe as, let alone neutral, negative about myself, which really made it hard for me to embody radical honesty with myself as I was healing. So as I started to have maybe partners or people, not that I think that we should let everything in from the outside world, because I don't think it all applies. I don't
agree.
think half the time people are even talking to us. However, sometimes someone else, especially someone who loves us, can offer us an objective perspective that could be helpful. I, however, found myself completely resistant or reactive to anything, completely defensive to any possible negative statement about me or less than shiny way I showed up in the world, because I never was told anything other than outstandingly Christ-like about myself to my own detriment.
Totally. In that perfectionism model. Oh, that's so tricky. Yeah, I think this is such an important conversation. And I mean, we all fall on all aspects of the spectrum, but I just love that you're offering tools that are practical, accessible. You can utilize them at any moment. I mean, I just think this is the next wave. What can we look forward to? What can we discover? I know you have a journal out. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So I developed, actually in my own healing journey, what I am now referring to as a future self journal. So it's a bit of a spin on, I think, traditional journaling, which actually I was never really one to journal, but I know a lot of people have a lot of great impact with writing about our past, getting insight, maybe using our journaling as a way to get at our feelings. I started to experiment with a way to use journaling as a tool to bring about daily consciousness towards change. So I came up with a simple 2-page template that is free, comes straight to your inbox if you sign up for my email list.
Great.
I think that on my Instagram, the .holistic.psychologist, in my link tree, I think you can easily get there, but 2-page template.
We'll link it below as well.
Yeah, linked below. Awesome. 2-page template. I have a blog that I also wrote on future self journaling and a YouTube, so you can get all the information, all of the how-tos. Essentially, it's just a way to practice consciousness daily toward change. So it's really centering us around working toward change in one area for at least 30 days, because as you and I have been emphasizing, it might take longer than 30 days to change. However, daily tool, you can show up every morning working toward that one area of change, writing about it, affirming a new thought that you would like to see, affirming a new way that you want to begin to show up in the world. And then, like I said, no magical tools, no magical journal either, showing up in that world. But the habit and practice of journaling about change daily, I've had great effect. And a lot of the followers that have been using it have been really finding it to be a very helpful tool. So that already exists in the world. Go jump on my email list and grab it. And also jump on my email list, because this fall/winter exciting things, I'm going to hopefully be offering groups and membership and also a first course.
Wow.
So no finalized details yet. I have another pretty big project that I'm knee deep in right now, but as soon as they become available, my ultimate goal is to speak to your point. So all of the tools that I talk about already readily on my Instagram is everything that I'm using with my clients.
Great.
There's no secret toolkit that because you're in front of me working with me individually, you'll get that I won't release publicly.
Great.
I'm very much a proponent of giving it all out there. So everything that you and I have talked about exists already somewhere on that Instagram and will continue to exist. But I do know that a lot of people have been requesting a more structured way to process, or to make it not just squares that come up twice a day of information, a little more of a structured workshop based. I love the model that you use in terms of how to just deliver this information in a very understandable, practically way to implement daily. So that's on the horizon.
And it's so wonderful for the world because it's affordable, compared to a lot of people don't have access to traditional therapy, which, we'd argue needs a little bit of a makeover. But it's so accessible. You can get it from anywhere around the world. I mean, I think it's going to be such a service.
Yeah.
Another question I ask everybody before I totally let you go is, what was your biggest rock bottom?
My biggest rock bottom. I think my biggest rock bottom came when I finally let some of the emotional impact of living the childhood that I lived in. That coincided a bit when I was going through my health crisis. However, I think the waves of the emotional rock bottom came a bit past that. But I say that because the impact that they had physically on me was beyond what I would have imagined to be the case. I mean, talk about fainting. I fainted a couple times. I think kind of polyvagal, security-based feelings, lack of security was coming up for me. So I think really wearing the physical impact of those emotions that I had repressed and dissociated from my whole entire life up until that point, I think would really define that bottomest of bottom. And like I said, I believe that the emergence of the more physical feel of it, the endless exhaustion, like I said, I felt really dizzy a lot and destabilized. And I knew that nutritionally I was okay by that point. So for me, that just illustrated, and it scared me, quite honestly, a bit. A little bit because my anxiety was very much health-based.
Yeah.
But because I also know that the physical and health toll that emotions can take. And I mean, if I even want to extend this further, I truly believe that a large reason why my mom suffers with chronic illness as she does is because of a lifetime of incredibly traumatic emotions that she has bottled up. So for me, that defines my bottom for that reason too, because I was scared. If this is how I was feeling when they were just coming to the surface a bit, well, everything that I was repressing was living in this body. And I started to understand my physical struggles, I think, in another light as well.
Incredible. And I think everybody can relate to that. And those who aren't even introduced to this gives them, a look through the window of where they can search and what they can look at next. Who have been your top 3 expanders to show you that everything you're living today, what you're successful in, what you're happy in, have been possible? And how did they show you and expand you? May you have known them in person, read about them, history.
Absolutely. So the first one that comes to mind, I'm such an incredible fan of Joe Dispenza.
Oh, yeah.
And his work. I mean, that's just beyond. When I was introduced to his work, I really was receptive and open to the power of our mind, and the way he presents it, and as grounded as it is, I think is right up there with him. I think the Bruce Liptons of the world. So I think the humans that are tapping into human potential in this new way, and probably a little bit of my scientific background and training, the fact that this is in an understandable way, I definitely throw them into my expander category. Rereading and introducing myself to the law of attraction through all of Abraham Hicks's work, with now a new understanding of what the hell people that were talking about that meant. And it's not just hoping for the million and it shows up at my door, I think, unfortunately, as The Secret depicted it to be, or at least as I perceived it when that movie came out in that much more mainstream way, however many years ago. I very much was like, what the hell is this? Mm-hmm. And I think giving a new set of eyes was really a part of my expansion in terms of, again, the mind piece of things. Trying to think in terms of expander. I mean, I don't know what you'll think about this, but I think my partner is an expander of mine, just because the way she views the world, if one might say, even though I'm hesitant, naturally, her baseline when she entered the relationship with me was so drastically different than my own, that she even to this day operates as a daily expander of mine and challenges me to see myself and to see the world in a way that isn't where my mind naturally goes. And I think I'm endlessly grateful to be living with someone that can bring me that level of expansion, but I definitely would throw her in there as well.
What a beautiful mirror. And to have that as a love, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for being here. I think everyone will have so many takeaways from this, and we'll have to loop around when the secret big thing you're working on comes out.
We will. That is awesome. And honestly, Lacy, I'm just going to thank you again. I'm so honored to chat with you. I've been following you, been inspired by you, been impacted by you. And I hope your community does get something from this.
Thank you. And vice versa. And wishing you all a wonderful weekend.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for tuning into the episode, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, we did. And in case you're not totally ready to join the pathway yet, I wanted to share a few of our free offerings that I'll often suggest to people as a little bit of a blueprint to get them started on their manifestation journey. The first place I like to direct people completely for free is the motivation. You can see it linked below or on our homepage as our testimony library. And it's categorized by different subjects, whether you're calling in career, money, love, wellness, and much more. When you're reading about a member's experience of what they manifested, you're actually seeing to believe and showing your subconscious that that very thing is possible for you. The second place I like to direct people is to the free clarity exercise, which is also linked below. In it, you get to try our own unique hypnosis process, learn about the science, and some journaling prompts. And the best part about this, you'll get a tiny taste of what it's like to go into your hypnotic state, bring your subconscious forward, and create new neural pathways while receiving clarity. And the third thing, if you haven't listened to it on this podcast yet, please go back to the episode titled Manifestation 101, where you'll learn the basics of neural manifestation to truly understand this process. So go ahead and check out those free resources, the motivation, the free clarity exercise, and the episode Manifestation 101, all linked below. And in an effort to make sure to have representation in this process series, go ahead and submit any process testimonials you have, especially to our LGBTQ+ community, our BIPOC, as well as the Ys, which is anyone in the community who is 45 and over. All right, we'll be back next week.